The ocean had always been my second home. From the first time I dove beneath the waves as a child, I felt an unexplainable connection to the vastness of the deep. It wasn't just a passion, it was my life. I had spent years exploring marine ecosystems, working alongside scientists, studying creatures that most people would never see in their lifetime. The ocean was predictable, ruled by cycles and patterns that made sense. At least that's what I used to believe. Lately, something had changed. Reports started surfacing from all over the world. Fishermen and divers were spotting creatures that had no business being near the surface. Oarfish, known in many cultures as a harbinger of disaster, and black devil anglerfish, creatures that thrived in the crushing darkness miles below the surface. At first, I dismissed the hysteria. I had spent my career debunking myths and proving superstitions wrong. There were logical explanations: seismic activity, underwater disturbances, climate change. The ocean wasn't sending warnings. That was just human imagination running wild, or so I thought. A news station invited me for an interview, wanting my professional opinion on the rising number of deep-sea creatures appearing in shallow waters. I sat under the bright studio lights, calm and composed, explaining how changes in ocean currents or tectonic shifts could easily account for these events. "So you don't believe there's anything unusual about this?" the host asked, raising an eyebrow. I chuckled, shaking my head. People love to find meaning in the unknown. Throughout history, humans have feared the ocean because we don't control it. But trust me, this is science, not prophecy. The interview wrapped up, and I returned home, feeling satisfied with how I handled the conversation. But that night, something happened that I could have never predicted. I was driving back from dinner, my mind preoccupied with work, when the headlights of an oncoming truck suddenly flashed into my vision. There was no time to react. The impact was immediate, a violent force slamming through my body, the screech of metal twisting, glass shattering. My car spun out of control. Pain exploded in my chest as everything went black. But I didn't just black out, I fell. It was like being pulled downward, as if gravity itself had shifted. The sensation was overwhelming, not like sinking in water, but like being dragged into something endless. My body was weightless, yet I could feel pressure closing in around me. My ears rang with an eerie silence, my breath non-existent. Then I opened my eyes. I was underwater, but this wasn't the ocean I knew. It was darker, a black void stretching infinitely in all directions. The water around me was thick, heavy, pressing against my skin like a living thing. It was then that I realized something that sent a bolt of fear through my chest. I wasn't alone. Something was watching me. From the depths below, shapes began to move. Gigantic, shadowy figures circled in the darkness, their glowing eyes locking onto me. My instincts screamed at me to swim, to escape, but my body was frozen. The silence was suffocating. Then, from the abyss, something emerged. I had studied deep-sea life my entire career, but nothing prepared me for this. Mouths lined with needle-like teeth, eyes that reflected an intelligence beyond human understanding. These weren't just fish. They were something older, something that shouldn't have been seen. My breath hitched. This wasn't just the ocean. This was the place where things were meant to stay hidden. Then I heard it. A sound. A rhythmic, steady tap, tap, tap against the surface above me. Footsteps. I forced my gaze upward, and that's when I saw him. Jesus was walking on the water above me. The moment I saw him, the crushing weight of the abyss around me vanished. The creatures that had been watching me recoiled, as if his presence alone had driven them back. The deep, endless blackness began to glow, illuminated by a golden light spreading outward from his form. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. Could only watch, and then, in a voice that echoed through the water, he spoke. They were never meant to rise. A shiver ran through me. Not from fear, but from knowing that I was hearing something I was never meant to understand. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to understand. But before I could, everything shattered. I felt myself being pulled back, ripped away from that place, as if an invisible force had yanked me out of the abyss. My body lurched, and then pain. I gasped, feeling my lungs burn as air rushed back into them. Voices shouted, machines beeped, hands pressed against my chest. I was back. I was alive, but I knew. I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see. I couldn't tell if I was breathing. I couldn't even tell if I had a body. The darkness around me wasn't just absence of light. It was alive, pressing against me, moving like a tide. I could feel it shifting, almost like it was studying me. At first, I thought I was dreaming, caught in the final moments of consciousness before my brain shut down completely. But the weight of the water, the slow pull of unseen currents, the way the cold seeped into me like a living thing, it was too real. I was deep, far deeper than any human should be. The pressure around me was unbearable, but I felt no pain. My instincts told me I should be crushed, that my lungs should have collapsed, that my body should be nothing but dust in the abyss. But I was still here. Then, a flicker of movement in the distance. At first, it was just a shadow stretching through the endless void. Then another, and another. Shapes, massive and unnatural, shifting along the ocean floor. The longer I looked, the more I realized they were watching me. I had spent my life studying deep-sea creatures, but these weren't like anything I had ever seen. Too big, too quiet, too intelligent. Their eyes glowed faintly, like lanterns flickering in the distance, and with every slow, deliberate movement, the darkness around them seemed to twist and pulse. One of them moved closer. The size was incomprehensible. Its head alone was larger than my entire body, its jagged teeth reflecting the faintest sliver of bioluminescent light. But it wasn't the teeth that unsettled me. It was the awareness in its gaze. I had seen sharks hunt, watched as predators stalked their prey. But this was different. It wasn't hunting, it was waiting. A low, reverberating hum filled the water, something I didn't hear with my ears but felt in my bones. My entire body tensed as the shapes began to move upward. Slowly, methodically, they were rising. A thought sank into my mind, unspoken but absolute. They are not supposed to leave this place. Something cracked above me. The water shuddered. And then, footsteps. I forced my gaze upward, and through the swirling darkness, I saw it, a figure standing on the surface of the water. At first I thought it was an illusion, some distortion of light playing tricks on my dying brain. But as he stepped forward, the ocean itself reacted. The current stilled, the pressure eased, and for the first time since I had arrived in this abyss, I felt warmth. Jesus! He didn't speak at first. He only looked at me. And in that gaze, I felt every doubt, every false certainty I had ever clung to evaporate. Then his voice echoed, not through the water, but through me. They were never meant to rise. The moment he spoke, the darkness shrank back. The creatures stopped moving. They didn't flee, they didn't attack, they obeyed. A golden glow spread from where he stood, illuminating the waters around him, revealing the depths in a way I had never seen before. The shadows trembled, as if terrified by his presence. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but my voice didn't exist here. Instead, images flashed before me. Visions, playing out in the water like reflections of something greater. I saw the world I had left behind, coastlines battered by waves, entire cities swallowed by the sea. I saw the people's faces, staring at the sky in confusion as the waters churned beneath them. I saw the creatures of the deep surfacing, drawn by something unseen, something that had disturbed the balance of the world. And then I saw the scriptures, verses I had heard before but never truly listened to, appearing in the currents like whispers of truth. Luke 21:25. There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea. Revelation 13:1. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea. Job 41:31-32. He makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. Everything clicked. The oarfish, the black devil angler, all the creatures that weren't supposed to be at the surface. They weren't just reacting to nature, they were responding to something greater. I turned back to Jesus, panic rising in my chest. Is this a warning? He didn't answer immediately. He only watched me, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he spoke again. What was hidden is now being revealed. Before I could ask what he meant, a force stronger than anything I had ever felt pulled me back. The water around me collapsed inward, the golden light turning to shadows once more. I fought against it, but it was too strong, ripping me from the depths, hurling me back toward the surface. And then, pain. A violent gasp tore through my chest. My body jerked, lungs burning as air rushed back into them. The blinding light of a hospital room replaced the darkness, figures moving frantically around me. "He's back!" someone shouted. Hands pressed against my skin, machines beeped wildly. My body was here, but my mind was still in the abyss. I had died, and I had seen something I wasn't meant to see. The sound of the hospital faded, replaced by an eerie silence. I wasn't fully awake, but I wasn't unconscious either. My body was back, gasping for breath, surrounded by doctors and machines. But my mind, my soul, was still there. I could still feel the weight of the water, the immense presence of something watching from the depths. And I could still see him, standing on the surface, unshaken, untouched by the abyss that had swallowed me whole. Jesus. His presence was unlike anything I had ever felt before. It wasn't just light, warmth, or peace. It was power, power that made even the deepest parts of the ocean tremble. The creatures below feared him, and in that moment I understood why. I wanted to speak, but my voice didn't belong to me anymore. My thoughts were nothing but echoes in a space far greater than my understanding. But he heard them. He turned his gaze toward me, and I felt everything inside me unravel. It wasn't painful. It wasn't terrifying. It was truth. They were never meant to rise. His words carried weight, pressing against me like the deep sea currents I had spent my life studying. I thought back to the news reports, the oarfish. Appearing near the surface, the black devil angler spotted in places it should never be. The world had brushed it off as a curiosity, a natural shift in the environment, but this wasn't natural. I tried to grasp the meaning of his words, but before I could, the water around him began to change. At first, it was still, calm, reflecting the glow of his presence like liquid gold. Then slowly, it darkened. The surface rippled, images forming like oil, spreading over glass, and I saw what was coming. The sea rose, devouring entire coastlines, pulling buildings, cars, and people into its depths. Cities crumbled under relentless waves. I saw storms that had no name, no warning, appearing as if the ocean itself had become something alive, something angry. I watched as scientists and world leaders stood before cameras, scrambling to explain the unexplainable. Their words meant nothing against the power of what was unfolding. And then I saw them, the creatures of the deep, the ones I had seen in the abyss, rising. Not just one or two, but thousands, pushing upward, breaking through the surface, drawn by something unseen. The people on the shores didn't understand. They treated it as a spectacle, filming with their phones, laughing, fascinated by the monstrous beings appearing where they never should have been. But then the ocean boiled. A tremor shook the earth, and the laughter stopped. Their faces turned. From curiosity to horror as something far greater emerged. A shadow beneath the waves, stretching for miles, a shape too vast to comprehend. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I knew what I was seeing. The beast was rising. Revelation 13:1. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea. I turned to Jesus, panic surging through me. Is this real? He didn't answer. He didn't need to, because I already knew. The visions weren't warnings. They weren't possibilities. They were inevitabilities. The world had ignored the signs for too long. The ocean had whispered its warnings, in waves and tremors, in creatures abandoning their homes, in the eerie silence before the storm. And now the silence was ending. I felt my body trembling, or maybe it was the water. My mind raced, trying to find a way to understand, to make sense of what I was seeing. Jesus raised his hand, and the images vanished. The sea returned to stillness, the golden glow spreading once more. And then he spoke again. Luke 21:25, "There will be signs in the sun, moon, and stars. On the earth, nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the roaring and tossing of the sea." The verse echoed through me, filling every corner of my being. The world wasn't ready, but it was coming anyway. I wanted to plead, to ask if there was anything I could do to stop it, to change it. But he looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully understand. Not sorrow, not anger, but something deeper. Certainty. Job 41:31-32. He makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron. He stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. I felt a force pulling me backward. I panicked, reaching out, trying to hold on to the moment, to understand more, to see more. Wait! But it was too late. The water collapsed inward, the abyss returning, dragging me away from the light. I fought against it, but I was powerless. The darkness swallowed me whole. And then, pain. I gasped, my body jerking violently, lungs burning as air rushed back into them. My vision blurred, hospital lights flickering above me. A deafening beat filled the room. Machines, voices, hands pressing down on my chest. I was back. I was alive, but I knew. I knew what I had seen, and I knew the world was running out of time. My body felt like it had been thrown back into reality with violent force. My chest burned, my limbs were numb, and my mind struggled to process what had just happened. My ears rang with a mixture of beeping machines, hurried voices, and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. "He's stabilizing," a voice said. I blinked, my vision coming into focus. A doctor stood over me, checking my vitals. Nurses moved around the room. I could feel the weight of an oxygen mask on my face, the stiffness of IV lines in my arm. I was alive, but my soul was still trapped in the place I had just left. The ocean, the abyss, the creatures, the rising, and Jesus. His words echoed in my mind, louder than the noise of the machines. They were never meant to rise. I tried to sit up, but my body refused to move. My limbs felt like they belonged to someone, else like I had been stitched back together but wasn't fully connected yet. A nurse noticed me stirring. "You need to rest," she said gently. "You were in critical condition. You're lucky to be alive." Lucky. I wanted to laugh, but there was nothing funny about what I had just seen. This wasn't luck. This was a warning. The doctor looked at me carefully. "You were gone for almost 3 minutes. We had to resuscitate you. Do you remember anything?" 3 minutes. In this world, it had been 3 minutes. But in that other place, it felt like eternity. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. How could I even begin to explain what I had seen? That I had stood in the depths of the ocean, surrounded by things that should never have been awakened. That I had seen Jesus walking on the water, showing me a prophecy unfolding in real time. They would think I was insane, so I shook my head. I don't remember much," I lied. The doctor nodded as if that was the expected answer. "That's normal. Near-death experiences can cause hallucinations or fragmented memories. Hallucinations. That's what they would call it. A trick of the dying brain. Nothing more. I didn't argue, I just listened. To the sounds of the hospital, the shuffling of feet outside my room, the distant chatter of television screens playing in the background, and then a news broadcast. At first, I wasn't paying attention, but then I heard the words that made my blood turn cold. More deep-sea creatures have been spotted surfacing in multiple locations worldwide, causing speculation among scientists and marine experts. My head snapped toward the television. On the screen, they were showing footage of an oarfish, long silver shimmering under the camera lights, writhing in the hands of fishermen. The headline at the bottom of the screen read, "Mysterious deep-sea creatures emerging. Scientists search for answers." I felt my heart skip a beat. This wasn't over. I wasn't just given a vision. I was given confirmation. I had seen this. I had been shown this, and now it was happening. I turned to the doctor, my voice hoarse. "Can you turn that up?" He gave me a puzzled look, but reached for the remote, increasing the volume. A marine biologist was speaking, her face serious. "It's unusual to see deep-sea species appearing so frequently in shallow waters. While we don't have a concrete explanation yet, some theories suggest tectonic activity or changes in ocean temperature might be responsible." Tectonic activity. Temperature changes. Science trying to explain what only one person had already seen. With his own eyes, I exhaled sharply, my mind racing. I had dismissed this before. I had stood on a stage and laughed at the idea of these fish being omens of something greater. Now I wasn't laughing, because I knew the truth. The fish weren't appearing because of climate change. They were appearing because something had been disturbed. Something was rising. I swallowed hard, gripping the edges of my hospital blanket as another realization struck me. I couldn't keep this to myself. But if I told the truth, who would believe me? I could already hear the skepticism, the laughter, the labels they would throw at me. Delusional, religious fanatic, conspiracy theorist. And yet, Jesus had looked me in the eyes and told me this was coming. How could I stay silent? The doctor finished making notes on his clipboard. "You'll need to stay for observation, but your vitals are strong. With some rest, you should recover fully." Recover. He thought this was about my body. But what about my soul? I wasn't sure I would ever recover from what I had seen. And even worse, I wasn't sure the world would either. The hospital felt like a cage. Every hour that passed, the walls seemed to close in, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a distant mocking whisper. I was alive. My heart was beating, my lungs were breathing, but my mind was still trapped in that moment beneath the waves. The vision wouldn't leave me, the weight of what I had seen pressed against my chest like an anchor. The creatures rising from the depths, the storms swallowing cities whole, and Jesus standing on the water, watching it all unfold. They were never meant to rise. I needed answers. The doctors kept saying I needed rest, that my body had been through a trauma, that my brain was still recovering. But I knew this wasn't just about me. The world was shifting. The signs were there, and no one was paying attention. When they finally discharged me, I walked out of the hospital feeling like I had returned to a world that no longer felt like my own. The city was the same. The people were the same. But I was different. I went straight home, locked the door, and started researching. First, I looked up the oarfish. It was known as the messenger from the sea god's palace in Japanese folklore. For centuries, fishermen believed its sudden appearance near the surface was a warning of earthquakes and tsunamis. Scientists dismissed it as coincidence, but the pattern was undeniable. Every time they appeared in large numbers, disaster followed, and now they were being spotted everywhere. Then I searched for the black devil anglerfish. These creatures lived at depths no human could survive. Their entire existence revolved around total darkness, feeding on whatever came too close. They weren't supposed to be near the surface, ever. Yet there were new reports of them being caught by accident. Was it really an accident? Or were they being forced upward by something greater than science could explain? Every article I read, every video I watched, confirmed what I had already known deep in my soul. This wasn't random. This was a sign. I searched for other instances of deep-sea creatures appearing before disasters, the 2011 tsunami in Japan, the 2004 earthquake in Indonesia. The signs had been there, written in the ocean itself. The world just wasn't listening. I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. This was real. I had spent my life believing in facts, in evidence, in logic. But this was something science couldn't explain. I turned off my computer and stared at the wall, the silence in my apartment heavier than ever. I had answers, but now I had another question. What was coming next? I wasn't the only one who had seen the patterns. People on forums and blogs were talking about it. Some were scared, some dismissed it as paranoia. But a few had seen things too. I reached out to a marine biologist I had worked with years ago. He had always been skeptical of religious interpretations, but I needed someone who would at least listen. We met at a cafe the next afternoon. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes before he even spoke. "You've seen the reports," I said. He nodded, stirring his coffee absently. "I don't know what to make of it. The numbers don't add up. Fish that should be miles below the surface are showing up all over the world. And the crazy part, it's not just in places where we'd expect seismic activity." I leaned in. "Then what's causing it?" He hesitated. "If I didn't know any better, I'd say they're fleeing." A chill ran down my spine. "Fleeing from what?" He shook his head. "That's the thing. We don't know." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of conversation around us felt distant, meaningless compared to what we were discussing. Finally, I took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to believe me." He frowned. "What?" I told him everything. The accident, the experience, the ocean, the creatures, the vision of the future, and Jesus. I watched his face carefully, waiting for him to laugh, to call me crazy, to dismiss it as a near-death hallucination. But he didn't. Instead, he sat back, rubbing his temples. "You're not the first person to tell me something like this." I blinked. "What?" "I've spoken to fishermen, divers, even a few researchers, people who have had dreams, visions, warnings, all about the ocean, all about something coming." Goosebumps crawled up my arms. "Then why isn't anyone talking about it?" He exhaled, shaking his head. "Because no one wants to believe it." I stared at him, my pulse racing. I wasn't alone. Others had seen the signs. Others had felt the shift. I pulled out my phone and opened the news. Another headline had appeared. "Unidentified deep-sea creature washes ashore. Scientists baffled." The accompanying image showed a massive, twisted form, something that looked like it had been dragged up from a nightmare. I turned the screen toward him. "Tell me that's normal." He swallowed hard. "It's not." Silence settled between us. I clenched my fists. "We need to find out what's really happening." He hesitated. "And if we do, what then?" I thought of Jesus standing on the water, his words ringing in my mind. What was hidden is now being revealed. I looked out the window, at the people walking by, unaware of what was happening beneath their feet. The world had ignored the warnings before. Would they ignore them again, or was it already too late? The world kept moving as if nothing had changed. People walked the streets, went to work, scrolled through their phones, laughed at meaningless conversations. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. I had seen it. I had been there. And now I couldn't unsee what was coming. I kept watching the news, scanning reports, following every new sighting of deep-sea creatures appearing in places they didn't belong. It wasn't stopping. It was increasing. More oarfish, more black devil anglerfish, more unidentified creatures, washing up on shores, their lifeless forms like silent warnings no one wanted to hear. The world's experts kept searching for logical explanations, changes in water temperature, unusual seismic activity, but deep down, I knew the truth. The ocean was reacting to something greater than science could explain. Jesus had shown me what was coming, and now the signs were everywhere. I thought about telling more people, about warning them, but the few I had already spoken to either laughed it off or looked at me with quiet pity. They didn't want to believe, because believing would mean accepting that something unstoppable was on its way. I found myself remembering his words over and over again. What was hidden is now being revealed. Had it already started? Were we already past the point of stopping it? I didn't have answers. I didn't know how long we had, but I knew this. The world was changing. And one day soon, when the tides shift and the waves rise higher than ever before, people will look back. They will remember the warnings. They will remember the signs, and they will realize the truth. But by then, it might already be too late.